Baby, CreepTime the podcast is going on tour and coming to a city near you.
So head over to creeptime.com to get your tickets to come see CreepTime live.
Well, you can't trust County.
Today, we have a very intimidating case to approach, mostly because I do believe that this is a very well-known story and it has been documented all over the media. So that's why I said before we jumped on, I would be maybe a little surprised if there wasn't maybe at least one part of this that you had heard of. But it is quite different from what we've explored on the show thus far.
Mm.
Mostly because, yes, it is a true crime case, but it is also one that spans over 10 years of agony until there is this kind of monumental shift that occurred in this story that makes it unlike anything else on Creep Time. For those who may know it, this is the true story of the abduction of 3 young girls under the man who would come to be known as Ariel Castro. And I will not spoil anything before we go down the rabbit hole on this, because this is going to be one that I'm going to have to tell moment by moment. But before we jump in, are you blind reacting, or are you somewhat familiar with the story and the name?
I feel like I'm blind reacting, but not in the normal sense. Like, I definitely have heard the name. I've seen photos before, I think.
Oh, okay.
Like, it sounds familiar to me.
It might click into as we get a little
Yeah.
bit further into the timeline. You might be like, oh, I've definitely seen a doc on this or something.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, for the sake of all the creepers who are listening who maybe don't know the story, you could strap in now, baby, because it's about to be crazy.
I'm still strapped. I'm still strapped because I'm telling you, I think it's come across my desk and then I haven't gone much further. So
I love that phrase. It's come across my desk.
It's come across my desk. But yeah, I just immediately recognize the name, but I
Mhm.
don't know where we're about to go with this. So I'm strapped.
We'll prepare. But before we should, get into anything, I guess I should give a warm welcome back to all of the creepers. Hi, babies. Welcome.
Hi, baby.
Greetings from the road, actually, if you're listening to this one. We are halfway across the country.
Yeah. I'm like, then baby, where are we?
When would this have come out? Because this will be the week after March 1st. So, like, I
Mhm.
guess we'll be, like, in Portland or Seattle. One of those?
Yeah. Yeah. Portland,
Probably.
I think.
Portland, honey.
Portland.
So, welcome. If you are brand new here, my name is Silas. This is Stu. And this is Creep Time, the podcast. And we come out with new content every single week for you on Fridays that covers all things strange, mysterious, the unexplained. So, stick around. You can follow the show. You can subscribe to the show wherever you listen. You can also hit the bell notification if you want to get alerts when we have surprise episodes. And I will also say we very, very, very much appreciate all of you who have given us positive reviews, whether you give 5 stars on Spotify or you want to give us a written review on Apple. That is so much fun for us to read. We love to read through those and sort of see how you're liking the show, feedback for the show. So please consider doing so. And if there is anything that you do, baby, any one thing, I was going to say, go to creeptime.com and get your tickets to CreepTime Live. But actually, I was going to say, what you should do is try to spread the show with somebody you know, whether it's a friend, a coworker, whoever. Every time you share this show, you get these stories out to more people. But with that said, how was that read for you? Was that
Can
good?
I just tell you the funniest thing? I thought you were going to say, we love reading those 3-star reviews. And I was going to say, baby, those are probably the least likely ones I want to read because it's like,
Mhm.
yeah.
The
It was
3-star
just cracking me up.
reviews are different from the 1-star ones because the 1-star ones are
Yeah.
almost kind of impersonal, where they're like, "This show's not for me. I don't like them." The
Mhm,
3-star
mhm.
ones get into our soul a little bit.
Exactly.
This is not your permission to give us a 3-star review.
Yeah.
We very much prefer and will elevate the 5 stars.
The 5s, baby.
But with all that said, shall we jump into our backstory?
Let's jump in.
Okay. I have sent you a link. So you have that link. You're sticking on the first page, correct?
hmm
All right. That will have some of the pictures that we're going to talk about, but at least pictures where you can see some of the victims of this abduction, as well as Ariel Castro himself. And again, creepers, this will all be up on Reddit per usual. So go to Creep Time, the podcast, the subreddit. I think while I was building this research. I was like, how do I structure this? I think the way that we have to talk about this case first before we actually get into the meat of the timeline, and I won't take too much time on this, we have to talk a little bit about the backstory of Ariel Castro. Just
Mm.
to unpack even more of what he did later in his life, let's first understand some of his childhood and his young adult years. So, Ariel Castro, he was a man born on July 10th, 1960, and he was of Puerto Rican descent. I believe he was born in Puerto Rico to Pedro Castro as well as Lillian Rodriguez. But he didn't stay there long. I think before he was even 5 years old, his parents had divorced, and I believe it was his mother who took him and his then three siblings and relocated them to the States, and they all moved up to Pennsylvania. They would later relocate while he was still pretty young out to Ohio, Cleveland specifically. For any Cleveland creepers that are listening, I am sure you know this case
Mm.
all too well. Now, the reason I would start this far back and start with his childhood is because I do think that from what he has said and what his defense team presented, he had a very horrific childhood. His childhood was sort of enveloped in this tirade of sexual abuse. He was
Mm.
sexually abused by a neighbor when he was living in Puerto Rico before he turned 5, and he also said he was sexually abused by his own uncle when he was a child. By the time he had relocated with his siblings and his mother to the States, and they had eventually moved over to Ohio, his mother was extremely physically abusive. So he said. She would use a whole myriad of weapons against him, as well as very violent physical beatings. And this instilled, so he said, this lifelong toxic relationship of hating women. Before I push any further, do the pictures of him read as such? Just curious, because some
Yeah.
people actually go back and forth on how he presents, which is interesting.
Um, I can see that, especially just
Mhm.
because of the difference between the 2 photos you have up there, even though I can tell one's a court photo and one's a mugshot. Like,
Right.
one of them, you can kinda see a little bit of a tougher exterior, and then I feel like there is kind of like a soft quality to his face, so I could kinda see like, it's almost as you were describing
Yeah.
that, I was like, "Am I looking at him as, like, a child almost?" Like,
It's
um
so interesting you say that because some of the people, when this all comes out, who had interacted with him, some of his closest friends, he also played in a band, he was a musician, they often said, and this is from multiple different people, they're like, he had to be the greatest actor in the world because you would
Mm,
never suspect this was the guy who could be capable of this. He
mhm,
just seemed casual, friendly. He was an elementary school bus driver for like 22 years. Like it
mm,
was shocking to a community,
yeah,
shocking to a neighborhood. But we have all that sets the stage, right? We have a really tumultuous childhood for him, but how does this translate into his young adult years? Because I think those are equally as important here. So, Ariel Castro, I believe in the late 80s, also married a woman and then fathered 4 children with her. Between the late 80s to the early 90s, this was a very dark period for that wife because of the extreme physical abuse and sexual violence he would inflict upon her. And when we're
mm,
talking about domestic violence in that house, I'm talking about reports I saw of multiple broken noses, broken arms, broken ribs, fractured skulls. There was an instance where she was pushed down a set of stairs, which had caused a skull fracture that led to a blood clot in her brain that gave way to an inoperable brain tumor, which eventually did kill her from
mm,
complications in 2012. So, this is an extreme scenario of a violent situation that this poor woman and her children are trying to get out of in the early 90s. And that's a very difficult thing to do. Very hard to get out, one, get on your footing when it comes to your finances of trying to house your 4 children, but also going through the legal loopholes, I guess, of or not loopholes, what am I saying? The legal process of trying
yeah,
to get full custody of your kids while also trying to get a restraining order against someone who is being actively violent to you, even though you're out of the house. He would stalk them, he would chase her. He had
ugh,
abducted multiple children back to his house several times. But I believe it was 2005 where she actually did get that restraining order, but he had been separated from them years before that.
okay. I was gonna ask if they were, like, fully divorced or but just
I
separated,
believe
so
so. No, I believe they were fully divorced. Sorry.
they
I
were
meant
oh,
physically separated. Like he
physically
was in his
separated,
own
yeah.
house and she was in her own apartment with these kids and he wasn't seeing them because again, she had gone through the legal process to get custody and then get that restraining order.
Gotcha. Oh my god.
It's pretty dark, but I also think this period of separation, physical separation, is important to talk about because when he was finally alone and he didn't have sort of the watchful eye of a family, let's say, with kids and a wife, this sort of gave way to a new era of this like diabolical nature in him, where because he was alone, he felt he could plot on something that was a lot darker. And that's what we're about to get into. But before I press on, now that you have the full scope of both his childhood and early adult years, any new thoughts on this situation or where this could go, I guess?
I mean, I'm just feeling so much empathy for his ex-wife and those 4 kids because this is
Mhm,
I know this is gonna turn very, very dark, and it feels like it's going outside of the scope of just, like, his own family. He's gonna this is
mhm.
someone that I'm already getting the sense is filled with, like, a lot of rage and, like, violent behavior, but they're also, from what I've
Absolutely.
deduced from you, like, presenting normally-ish in society, and it kinda just feels like they're gonna blow a gasket one day.
Yeah, and also there's a two-faced element to him as well, where
Mhm.
I there's like a dark and light sometimes where what you see in public is not always what goes on behind closed doors, which in some ways was kind of what was happening with his first wife and those kids. You know, he was
Mhm.
still working, he was still presenting as kind of a community man who, played in the local band and all had all these activities and people who were connected to him, but behind closed doors, he's breaking noses and fracturing skulls
Yeah,
kinda
it
guy.
just feels very, like, dangerous. Obviously, I know that that's where
Mhm.
this is going, but I feel creepers in this moment, like, scared. I feel very nervous and I feel very scared
He's a
because
terrifying man.
to do that to your own family is that takes, like, such a just takes such an intense level of, like, hatred and violence and rage.
And I do have some evidence later on that we'll get into where it's kind of a journal entry, but also kind of an unused suicide note where he sheds some light on what's going on in his head and the sort of you see a bit of that turmoil where he's like, there's something wrong with me.
Mm.
I have this one side of me that's like this in public, but there's something dark inside of me that when I'm home,
Ugh.
I can let out. I'll go into further detail on
Mhm,
that
mhm.
later.
Yes.
But this would be a good time to shift into our timeline. So, still stick on the first page if you're following along Creepers, you as well, Stu, so you can look at him and then look at the three women that I'm about to discuss. This case will focus on three women involved in one of the largest stories that has ever broken out of Cleveland. They are Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. So here is what we know and what we're about to get into. Between the years of 2002 to 2004, Ariel Castro was responsible for the abduction of these three women that were kept in his home after he had just been living in that house with his former wife, his kids. Once he was alone, he concocted this plot where they were all abducted in a very similar way between those 2 years. The method would start in 2002, where he would tend to offer these girls rides, and then he would drive up in his, unassuming sedan and get them in the car under the guise of, like, I'll give you a ride home, but they would never make it. He would capture them, take them into the home where they were restrained and kept for his pleasure. So we are first going to start with one of three. This is Michelle Knight and how she was captured because she is the first girl. Michelle was born on April 23rd, 1981, which would make her 21 years old at the time she was taken by Castro. And I'm sure you can see a picture. I think it's probably on the left hand side.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's a bit of a grainy photo, but you can definitely get a sense for her and her youth and how, what she looked like.
Yeah, this is weird. She looked like, Thora Birch to me at first
I kinda
glance.
thought that too. That's so weird you said that. I kinda
Yeah.
thought that, but I was like, "Maybe it's just the hair," but I think she does
Mhm.
actually.
Yeah, she actually really does.
Mm. Well, Michelle, it's kind of interesting about her because she was going through a bit of a rough time in her life, and I didn't know this when I had first read the story, but I knew that when she was captured, she was in the middle of a custody battle for her son that had been taken by the state, right? So she's 21 years old, and this personal battle was that Joey, her son, had been taken. I did not know that Joey, her son, was the result of a rape that had occurred in school a year prior. So after she was the victim of sexual assault, she carried this baby to term. And then when she was 20 years old and she couldn't provide for him, he was taken by the state. So this was her chance to go to court and try to lay her case and petition for how she can regain custody. It was on the very day that this court appearance was due that she was abducted. So she never showed.
Oh my god.
This is kind of damning specifically for her, and we'll get into this a little bit later with her versus the other girls, because she was an adult. And when she didn't show for court, the assumption that was made by everybody who knew about that appearance was that she couldn't handle the heat. She couldn't handle the judgment or the scrutiny of being in that courtroom, so she ran. She got out of town, got mixed up in something else. So nobody ever actually looked at this as a missing person report, which is so
No.
unfortunate.
Oh my god, the timing of that is insane.
Yeah, they well, they had just built their own narrative. They were like, "It's too coincidental that she goes missing on the one day she's due in court to, like,
Yeah.
share her side of the story." So, unfortunately, this was August 23rd, 2002, when Michelle Knight was actually last seen leaving her cousin's house on foot, and she was at the corner of West 106 and Lorraine Ave. Pay attention to those streets, they will come into play again. There was no immediate witness who saw what happened, but what we would learn later is that she was coaxed into a ride in the sedan of Ariel Castro, and she was never seen again. Only 8 months after her abduction, after she had gone missing, there was another girl in this area, a girl who would disappear. This was Amanda Berry. Amanda Berry, you will also see on that page on the middle right. This
Mhm.
is April 22nd, 1986, that she was born. So that would put her at just about 17 years old. And actually, I forgot to mention this. Her birthday was gonna be the following day. She was abducted one day before her 17th birthday. Amanda's abduction, if you can believe it, is actually a little bit creepier than the previous. She was last seen, or heard from, we should say, on April 21st, where she was calling her sister around 8 PM. I think I had originally read on a payphone, but she also had a cell phone, so I'm gonna guess it was her cell phone, unless she was, like, being charged for minutes or something.
Mhm.
But she had called her sister, and the reason she had called her, was to let her know that she didn't need a ride home from work. She was working the end of her shift at Burger King that night in town, and she said, "I don't need a ride anymore. Somebody's offering me a ride." She did not say who was offering her the ride. What we would learn is that Ariel Castro had approached her while she was in the middle of making that call, or just about to make the call, and had said something to the effect where he was like, "Hey, do you need a ride by any chance? I saw you kinda lingering. My son works at this Burger King too. If you could tell me where your place is, I'm happy to give you a lift." And that was enough to get her into the car. She took him up on that ride, and she was gone. This was on Lorraine Ave and West 110th Street, almost the exact same location, certainly the same neighborhood as where Michelle was abducted 8 months prior.
Ugh.
But after that 8 PM mark, Amanda was never seen again. And what's interesting about her case versus Michelle's is that they had initially assumed that Amanda was a runaway for some reason. Maybe it was the pressure of, being 17, leaving high school, whatever it was. So for the first week, cops are like, this girl's a runaway, a teen runaway, until Amanda's mother gets a phone call, mysterious phone call from an unknown male voice. And it's from Amanda's cell phone. And he said, I have a quote here: "I have Amanda. She's fine and will be coming home to you in a couple of days." So immediately, her disappearance is no longer categorized as a runaway. This is a full on abduction. And the media kind of caught fire with this. And there was a lot of press coverage on it. This, I think, it got a whole segment, I believe, on Fox. And they also profiled it on the Oprah Winfrey show. This was on the Montel Williams show. So there was a lot of heat on Amanda's story, this
Mm.
17-year-old girl and the mysterious phone call with the unknown guy. And what was so much worse than all of this is that in the midst of this story unfolding over the next couple of years, I believe it was Amanda's mother, Luana Miller. She had been kind of relentlessly looking for her daughter, and she had gone and done all these news segments. She died in 2006 of heart failure in the middle of looking for her daughter. So she would never really get closure on her daughter's disappearance as to what actually happened to Amanda. Which brings us to our third girl. We have finally arrived at the abduction of Gina De Jesus, who was born February 13th, 1990, which made her only 14 years old at the time she was abducted. This one, I'm going to brace you for because it is possibly, I think, one of the more sickening abductions of the three girls that took place, solely because there was some pretty foul manipulation used here.
Mm.
Gina, just 14, she's, if you can picture it, walking home from school just after 3 PM. She left her middle school, And she turns the corner, I believe, on West 105th Street and Lorraine Avenue, the same exact neighborhood, when Ariel Castro pulled up to her. And this might surprise you, but she recognized him. In fact, she knew him. Ariel Castro was the father of one of her best friends in middle school. And he pulled up
No.
and they immediately recognized each other. And because she knew him as her best friend's dad, and he was like, "Hey, nobody gave you a ride today? Do you need to lift back to your place?" She took him up on the ride, something
What
she
a
wouldn't normally do.
sicko.
His daughter's friend in his car. She would become the third victim, the third abduction. So we now have all three girls who have been taken back to his home at 2207 Seymour Avenue, and none of these abductions had a single witness. Before we detail what is actually uncovered to have gone down in that home over a very lengthy period, I just want to get your thoughts on the three girls now that I've kind of talked about them and I've talked about the method of how they were taken and how they were
Mhm.
coaxed into the car.
I mean, I guess I'm just seeing a pattern of escalation in terms of like, okay, what else can I get away with? Can I
Mm,
go, he went younger and younger both times. He got like more diabolical, I would argue, both times. I mean, to leave the voicemail and then to take someone that he was
that's so.
absolutely starting to like really he obviously had already lost the plot, but I mean, just the darkness that is emanating off of him, and I'm so like, genuinely, as you started to unpack Gina, like, my eyes started watering because I was just like, "I know that this is gonna be." I don't know
Mhm.
what took place in that home, but I'm, like, looking at the exterior of the home, just wondering to myself, like, "Please, I hope that this is not, like, exactly what I think it is," and I'm nervous that it is, but I'm gonna temper myself, but, like, it's just we're dealing with somebody so dark, and I know we've, like, looked at a ton of really dark serial killers, but
Right.
there's something about him that feels so just, like, yeah, manipulative and calculating and just grotesque, honestly.
Agree. It's the length of time too that we know from this story inherently for how long torturous things and sort of diabolical things went down in that home, even after these very, very dark abductions that took place, where he's manipulating girls into being like, "I'm a safe guy, you shouldn't be walking home alone at night," kind of thing. Like, "Let me give you a ride. Oh, you're my daughter's friend. Nobody gave you a ride. Hop in." Like, that's really diabolical
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
But I can press on now to talk about what actually happens in the house, which will take us back to the original abduction, where we're going to talk about Michelle first. So, as you can guess, any of the creepers who are listening, this is not only a story of abduction, but this is a story of extreme captivity. Inside this home that sat on Seymour Avenue, all three girls and the events that unfolded within these walls over the next 10 plus years are something that you could only really talk about in the context of a horror movie. Without detailing the sort of like slow additions of each girl to the mix and just talking about like what it was like when they were all there. By the time Gina was added to the mix, we have three girls that have been captured and are kept in the upstairs bedrooms of this home, where they were locked into secret rooms with plastic toilets that were stationed for them. During the early stages of this captivity, the girls were kept on a very strict like regimen of one meal per day, and they were allowed to bathe once or twice a week at maximum if they were on good behavior. Any deviation at all from this pattern meant extreme punishment by Ariel, which equated to extreme beatings and usually sexual assault. In the earliest stages of this captivity, if we can reference back to when Michelle, the first girl, was abducted, she was alone for a very long period of time. So she detailed that she was originally brought into the house on the day of her abduction, and at first, he kept her upstairs in this room. Would come to be the bedroom they were all kind of kept in, but she said that he hung her up, like restrained her legs, restrained her arms, almost like he hung her up upside down. She said it was like a fish to be gut. And by the time he released her after she was hung up for hours, her arms and legs were basically immobile from being suspended for so
Mm.
long. So he then grabbed her by the legs, dragged her down a series of stairs, whacking her head every time. And he was taking her to the basement of this home. When she was in the basement, he then chained her up by the neck and he placed a motorcycle helmet over her head that would sort of muffle any of her screaming, any of her calling, and she remained in that state for weeks in this basement, chained up by the neck with a motorcycle helmet on her head. The reason being is because while she's chained up 24 hours a day, something is going on upstairs in that upstairs bedroom where she was originally stationed. What had happened was that Ariel had started a reno project where he was trying to make a makeshift chamber upstairs where she could be held permanently as his pet. So finally, when he came down after a series of weeks, he got her upstairs, led her up there, and she was very weak at this point, and he chained her up in the room, and he said, "This is where you will spend the rest of your days." This would end up being a space that would later hold the two other girls because he had fashioned the whole situation upstairs with specialty doors, which I think if you scroll down maybe to the second page, you can see some of the home inside. I might have included it.
Yeah.
There are specialty doors with automatic locks. There are drapes that cover stairwells so people who come into the home don't know where to go and see that. There are chains that restrain these girls. Everything about this was shaped perfectly for long term captivity. And investigators would later learn that Ariel had committed countless acts, countless acts of rape against Michelle in that
Mm.
room just in the first year of her abduction. The only thing that he ever allowed her, and this was after some time, was to have a small TV set upstairs. And she had actually, this broke my heart, but she had been kept in the dark for so long that at a certain point, while she was still there, her eyes had suffered like permanent damage from living in darkness for so long. Like she couldn't see very well at a certain point.
My God.
So he had allowed her this TV, and this was kind of her one window to the outside world to watch the news, to understand what was happening, and that there were still people out there, and that the world didn't stop and start with these four walls. And this is also how she would learn that another abduction was coming, because the next girl would be Amanda Berry. She saw this on the news before she was even brought to the house. So Amanda Berry is brought to the room. After she is abducted, she is also chained up in this house. And very soon after that, we would get Gina as well, who was added to the three. And specifically, I believe Gina was chained up directly to Michelle, where for a period of time while they were in captivity, Ariel Castro had witnessed these girls, Gina and Michelle, bond quite a bit. And some have described it maybe as like it could have been a sister bond, but it seemed more like mother daughter because of the age difference, because
Mm.
Michelle was now 22 years old and Gina is only 14. And Michelle has been suffering this for a full year and knows what he's capable of. She could guide her. The reason I want to bring up something here that is very, very dark and twisted is because I think it's important to give context to the horror of what he would inflict afterwards. Ariel Castro, as mentioned, was sexually assaulting all of these girls at different times, but it seemed that Michelle was his go to for a very long time because it was hateful and he hated her for
Mm.
whatever reason. He hated Michelle. In fact, wanted to get rid of her at a certain point. It is comprehensible what he ended up doing to her, but after he would rape her, a period of time would pass and inevitably Michelle gets pregnant. She was pregnant a total of 5 times while in captivity with him. And each time, his method of ensuring that she would miscarry was very similar. He admitted that he would starve Michelle for a period of 2 weeks straight. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, he would deal a series of blows to her lower abdomen, quite literally, until she miscarried in front of him. But this wasn't the case for the other girls. It was only for Michelle, because Amanda Berry would also become pregnant while she was chained up in that house, but her situation was very different and possibly more twisted. Ariel Castro wanted her to have the baby. He allowed her to carry that baby to term, and Michelle was told to help deliver the baby, and that if it wasn't healthy, if Michelle did not deliver a healthy baby in that bedroom upstairs, he would kill Michelle that day. So here's what we know happened when it came to that pregnancy and delivery. We know that Amanda Berry went into labor, I believe, on Christmas Day 2006. They are years into living in captivity in this bedroom where Castro had basically bought them a small inflatable pool that he had filled with cold water. And Michelle is there to deliver the baby because she's the only one who's already had a baby before. She has no medical experience, and she's doing so under the pressure that if she does not deliver a healthy baby that has had no prenatal care, no early care, or ultrasounds or anything, she's going to die that day. After an excruciating labor that took place in that bedroom, a baby girl was born. And for a brief moment, that baby girl stopped breathing, to where Castro forced Michelle to give the infant mouth to mouth until she successfully resuscitated the baby. There is now a new twist to this whole plot because we have a child that has been born in captivity among these three girls. Before I keep going, I need to check in with you because I'm laying a lot on here. How are you
Yeah.
doing through this sort of
No,
hellscape?
I mean, I did start to get, like, a little bit emotional because to put women through this kind of torture is one thing, but a man will never know what it is like to I mean, I have never been pregnant myself, but even just now, I'm, like, downloading the feeling of that maternal instinct that's just gonna kick in, even if it's this child that, you're forced to carry to term and, like, the
Mhm,
panic of all of that, and, like, still, I think a lot of women have the instinct to, just biologically, it's like, I have to see this through in a weird way, and
mhm,
having this guy pressuring you to do it, and it has to be perfect. I mean, it's like a level of psychological torture from a female perspective that, like, I am even having a hard time wrapping my brain around because, I mean, it's so far beyond, like, anything about your body at that point. It's like
mhm.
it's like forced. Everything is so forced, and it's like this thing that only you are understanding. Only you can know what that experience is like. He has no idea, and it's just that kind of psychological torture. I don't know if I'm making any sense,
I
but,
think it makes complete sense, to be
like, I
honest.
can't imagine having to go through that, and also having the added layer of, like, the semi camaraderie with these other women. It's the
You have to.
weirdest, like,
Yeah.
I absolutely cannot, from, like, a mental standpoint, imagine what any of this must have been like. I mean, it's and also from the I'm, like, listening and looking at these photos, and it's like hoarders.
I
It's
was gonna
like
ask, I was like, how is it listening to this case and sort of seeing the pictures in real time of the girls and, of course, like, what the space would be uncovered as, and it's just a mess of chains and filth, and it's horrifying.
I feel like I'm there, and I think that that's why I'm kind of having a hard time even, like, articulating how I feel because I feel very, like, verklempt. I feel very, like, choked up a little bit because it
Mhm.
just this whole scene and the pressure is very it's just intense.
There is, you said something that reminded me of this, and I wanted to shed some light on it because there was a certain point in this captivity in this home where the girls, according to, investigators and Ariel Castro, had developed a bit of, Stockholm syndrome, I guess you could call it, but some of the psychologists who have looked at this actually didn't say that it was Stockholm syndrome, but it was more of a dissociative behavior
Mm,
where this was so traumatic and so stretched out, their captivity, this was so long term that the brain can actually trick you because you can't stay in a state of panic like that. I was
mhm,
so interesting watching an interview about this. The psychologist was saying that your body and your brain cannot stay in that prolonged state of panic. So they have to find another way to stop the panic. Your brain will do this where your brain can make you believe that you actually like this person. So I guess that is kind of textbook Stockholm syndrome, but they described it much more as a dissociative episode where you're almost a spectator. You're a spectator to like, I'm not really here.
mhm.
He's doing these things to her, but I'm her. I'm just watching her kind of
Yeah,
thing. And that could have been amplified by having a number of other women that were also in the room who suffered the same fate, but also that maternal instinct that you're talking about with this baby girl that was now born. There is this instinct to want to protect her because you know of what that man is capable of.
yeah,
You know of what he can do. So that takes us to a very different part of the story because at this point, we're years. We are years into captivity. The three girls who were originally abducted They are still alive at this point, and there's now a child in the mix. And he treated this little girl, this baby, very different. I suppose, luckily, if there's any use of that word in this case, but he treated her very different from the others who were held in captivity because he could raise this child from infancy. So he kept that child mostly in the bedroom upstairs to be taken care of by the girls, but he would also take the child out with him and he would sort of play this role of being a normal father. So we believe. There are still some details about this. Truthfully, we will never know. Ariel Castro would often take this little girl out of the home, and he had told different people different stories that I read. His own mother knew that it was his biological child, but I don't think ever clocked where the child had come from, like which woman this was connected to. And she grew up calling Ariel Castro daddy, and she called her grandmother Grammy. And Ariel's other children were also introduced to this baby. And he told them that it was his girlfriend's child. And it was unclear of whether or not he was insinuating that he had fathered the child or that it was just his girlfriend's child and he was taking care of her. And then any of his friends in town who had asked about the baby, he just said that it was his granddaughter, one of his kids. So during her childhood in the home, and I don't have a name for this child, I will just refer to her as the child to protect her. She was often kept upstairs in those bedrooms, and I don't think really understood the severity of what was going on because she was protected on both fronts. Ariel Castro is treating this with a sense of normalcy, and the women upstairs are trying to protect this child from the damage that he could do to her and what this captivity could do to her. This child was subjected, though, I will say, to witness quite a few violent things in that home. Investigators would learn that there were times where this child would see the punishment that sometimes meant beatings, it sometimes meant isolation, and it sometimes meant rape. And this child would see that. There were many other very grisly details that I can share to sort of paint the years of captivity in this house, but what I actually want to focus on here is something that might bring an end to Castro. Through the years, Castro had been getting very, very comfortable with playing mind games. If I could set this up, he played mind games with these girls where he had set such a strict pattern of disobedience equals pain that the girls would almost always obey him no matter what. He could bet on that, right? So what he would do is he would play this game where he would kind of allow them out of the bedroom under supervision where like they knew sort of the layout of the house, which would plant a seed of like, should I try to escape? Should I try to get out or something? But when they were back upstairs in the room, he would sometimes leave the room. He would intentionally leave the door unlocked and cracked open just a little bit, almost like he forgot. What he was doing was he was waiting around the corner in a bedroom to see if any of
Mhm.
the girls would try to come out and like peek out to see if they could make a run for it. And if he caught them, they would be isolated, sometimes for a period of weeks. They would be severely beaten. All the punishment that encompassed that would hit them. So they learned this pattern of he plays tricks. So we obey, so we don't fall for the tricks. That's the system. But this door system of leaving it cracked open after he left one time might have actually been the catalyst that ended the era of this horror because we are now at this point more than a decade, 10 years into these three girls and this little girl in captivity. Before I jump into it, I'm going to need you to brace because this is
Okay.
going to get kind of insane. I'm actually going to get my phone ready because I also have some audio that I'm going to play today as well.
Can I ask one quick
No, no,
question?
I'm kidding. I'm
No.
kidding.
Did he did he have, like, surveillance on them at all? Do you know?
You know what? I'm
Or
trying to
was
remember
it really
actually.
just I mean, to
I don't
from the
think
pictures,
so.
it doesn't look like it, and it doesn't look like to be totally just transparent. It's in such a state of disarray. I don't think he probably could
Yeah.
afford to have, like, like, crazy cameras and sound, but I just was curious. I was like, "I wonder if these girls had any
Mhm.
thought that maybe they were being, like, tapped or anything."
I didn't see any mention where he had played games like that, where he told them that there were cameras or anything like that. I actually don't know if he was all too smart to come up with something like that, because
Mhm.
that can be a very scary scenario if you think there are hidden cameras watching you.
Yeah.
I also, to your point of him not being able to afford it, I don't think he was working anymore because I think he had finally been fired after 22 years from his elementary school job as the bus
Mm.
driver. And I read horrible things about that where he had like parked the bus at times so he can go get like a dinner break at Wendy's and left kids on the bus. Like he
No
had been caught
regard.
drinking and driving, like,
Oh my
he had to
god.
be out of that job, but still, they didn't know what he was capable of, and then he hadn't worked in such a period of time that I believe at this point, while we're at the 10-year mark, his home is in, like, extreme foreclosure. He hadn't paid property taxes in something like 3 plus years,
Mm,
so I don't think he has really any money coming in.
yeah,
But no, I don't think he had surveillance. I do know that he had specialty door locks that would lock automatically, but I think that was the most technically advanced of what
advanced.
he
Yeah.
put in there. But where does this lead us? On May 6th, 2013, something took place in that house that was unprecedented. Amanda Berry's daughter, who is now 6 years old, she's been living and was raised in this for 6 years. She is usually free to roam the house downstairs, right? Because this is normal for her. She's only ever known him as daddy, right? Now, Ariel had been upstairs before, and he had done the same trick that he usually does, right? He leaves the door just a crack open to test if the girls are going to try to escape. But he had done this so much that they knew to avoid it, right? They knew the tricks and they weren't going to fall for it and suffer the punishment. So he left the door open. They thought it was a trap. He had actually forgotten. This would be the day that changed everything. Because what you're about to hear is the hour where all three of these young girls escaped captivity for good and survived after a 10-plus year abduction. Now, this 6 year old, she called upstairs and she yelled, "Daddy left the house." So immediately, all of the girls kind of perked up and they assumed, they're like, this is a setup. This is one of his tricks, isn't it? And he probably told her to say that to test if we were going to come out of the room and try to go downstairs. So they initially dismissed it. But when the 6 year old girl actually came up the stairs and opened the door herself, which was still left open, and she said, "No, daddy left. He told me to come up here and just stay put." All three girls locked eyes. This hadn't been their first attempt to escape. Michelle had actually at one point gotten so far along and was almost successful in escaping, she had actually made it outside of the house to the backyard where she couldn't hop the fence because of the state of her body,
Oh.
and she was dragged back in. So they had been down this road before, and she suffered quite a bit of punishment from that. But still, they thought, what if it's true? What if this is the chance? So it was actually Amanda's door that was left unlocked, and she took a breath and she very slowly got up from the bed. She was unchained, and she made her way carefully to the bedroom door and she poked her head outside. There's nobody. Castro is not upstairs. He's not around a corner watching, but maybe he's waiting downstairs, is what she thought. So she took her chances. She very slowly walked out of the bedroom and she started to quietly creep down the staircase towards the front door of the house, watching every single corner she could with every step to make sure that Castro wasn't watching her. She saw nothing. So she actually made her way all the way to the front door of the house, and the door was unlocked. Ariel Castro had left the house and he forgot to lock the upstairs and front door. There was only one thing that stood between her and the outside world, though. There was a screen door that had been permanently bolted shut. So all she could do was scream through that screen door, which is insane to be still trapped in the place, but you can shout to the outside world. So when Amanda ended up seeing a neighbor across the street, she just began yelling with everything she had in her for help. And this was Angel Cordero, who was the neighbor who immediately heard her and came to her aid, but he only spoke Spanish. He didn't know what she was saying. So he ran. He grabbed another neighbor who has also become a very famous name in this case, Charles Ramsey. He was the neighbor who came to the door. And Amanda is, of course, she's in hysterics. She's begging. She said, "Please open the door before he comes back." And Charles actually made the call to kick the door open from the bottom, where he kicked so hard he had basically made a little opening, like a hole, which I think you can see down on the
Mhm.
third page.
Yeah.
From this opening, Amanda and her 6 year old daughter crawled out of that hole to the outside world, and Amanda had not touched the outside in something like 10 years.
Oh my
All while
god.
Michelle and Gina are still upstairs listening to all of this happen downstairs. They are absolutely terrified, and they still don't know if this is a trick. They still don't know. They remained in that room. They were so scared. So Amanda ended up running to the neighbors across the way and she dialed 911, and it exists as one of the most historic rescue calls that has ever been recorded. And I am going to play it for
Oh my
everybody to hear
god.
right now. This is the exact moment that we know that Amanda had broken free and she had gotten across the way and got on the phone with 911.
Help me, I'm Amanda Berry. You need police, fire, or ambulance? I need police. Okay, and what's going on there? I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years and I'm here. I'm free now. Okay, and what's your address? 2207 Seymour Avenue. 2207 Seymour. Looks like you're calling me from 2210. Looks like you're calling me from 2210. I can't hear you. It looks like you were calling me from 2210 Seymour. Yeah, I'm across the street. I'm using the phone. Okay, stay there with those neighbors. Talk to the police when they get there. Okay. Thank you. Okay, talk to the police when they get there. Okay. Hello? Yeah, talk to the police when they get there. Okay, I'm gonna right now. We're gonna send them as soon as we get a car open. No, I need them now before we get back.
Oh my God, stay on the phone with her.
I mean, who's the guy? Who's the guy you're who's the guy who went out? His name is Ariel Castro. All right.
So if we stop there, a number of things about that call. Before I dive into them, I just want to get your very blunt initial reaction to the
Oh
horror
my
of that
God.
call.
Sorry, I was like, stay on the phone with her. I mean,
I know. I know. I
I
was
don't know
like,
why you would let her get off the phone. I mean, she just said 10 years I've been missing.
this
Like,
operator, I swear to God, like,
I,
it was
like,
pissing me off.
yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted. I mean, I
I would have done
definitely, I started to tear up when she said, my name is Amanda Berry. I've been missing for 10 years. I mean, she sounds so young
too.
too.
And she says, I'm free now, too. Yeah, truly, like for kind of frozen in time, like where she was at 17 years old, 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean,
The call is,
yeah, it's insane.
insane.
I can't believe that. Yeah, I mean, that's public and it exists. I mean, it's a great thing because it gives people hope. But that is, I cannot believe that. I just can't wait to see like how they, how fast they get the other two girls out of there, and I hope it's fast.
Well, that's the thing. When I was like losing my mind when the dispatcher was like, we're going to send a car out as soon as it's open. And I'm like, as soon as it's open?
Yeah,
As soon as the
like,
car's open?
yeah,
I was like, sorry, did you miss the part about like I've been missing for 10 years?
yeah.
I was like, as
How
you're
about
opening
before
a
he
car?
gets back? Like we're in
Well, that was
a
the thing. The thing is,
Yeah.
Amanda remembered this call and saying like she was so insistent to be like, no, you have to send somebody now because I don't know when he's gonna come back to the damn
Mhm.
house. And the two other girls are still in there. So the second that he comes in and realizes the door is broken, we've got two girls upstairs, they could be dead.
Yeah, I
within
was gonna say
minutes.
that's grounds for he's gonna kill them.
So of course, I mean, if he knows that the jig is up and that there's one girl that got out, he's gonna put up a fire out, basically,
Mhm.
is what he's
Mhm.
gonna do. So I was infuriated when I heard that 911 call because she's like, as soon as we get it, I'm getting a car open for you. I'm like, what you need to open a job application because you're no longer a dispatcher, is what I'm feeling.
Fill up
I
the
don't think you're working.
application.
I think
Yeah.
you need to go downtown and you need to fill up an application, is what you need to
Oh,
do.
yeah.
It was infuriating. And also, well, yeah, why not stay on the phone with her? I have never heard of a dispatcher try to get somebody off the phone and be like, they're coming. Don't worry.
Yeah,
They'll
I
just talk
mean,
to the police when they get there. Yeah.
also, how about you can hear the child in the background?
Screaming. She knows something's wrong.
Mhm.
Ma
Take a deep
issues with
breath.
that dispatcher is sad.
I know. We'll take our issues up with the dispatcher. You better run and hide, whoever you are.
I'll get a name.
Whew.
I'll
You
get
have a name?
No, I will get one though.
I was like, don't name him now because the creepers are gonna be coming for him.
I needed a little bit of release and shake
Levity,
off after
yeah.
that. It's been a lot of like, this case is very heightened pretty much the whole way through. So
Yeah.
it feels good to like be on the downhill portion of it now.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
the aftermath. In the aftermath of this discovery, the street, as you can imagine, it is swarmed with special units after responding to this because we can't forget that these are girls that were presumed dead, basically. I mean, they had disappeared 10 years ago. Their families had assumed they were dead. This is going to really, I'm going to have to swear, fuck you up. This is going to
Mhm.
fuck you up. I don't know what time it is.
50, 45.
45. Joggers.
Jokers.
At one of the vigils for the girls, Ariel Castro not only attended, but apparently led the prayer,
What?
led the memorial prayer in their community for one of the vigils of the girls. I believe it might have been actually for Amanda. All while she is not only in his home, chained up in an attic, she has given birth to one of his children in that attic.
I have no words.
There are none. But, like, if I can talk a little bit more about the immediate aftermath, right? So we've got all these, units that are on the street, and there was one main officer who went into that home first because they knew this was a captivity scenario. They didn't know how severe this was or what they were walking in on or if it was booby trapped, if Castro's in the house, anything could happen. The lead officer who made their way into the home remembered that when he finally got upstairs, that was the moment that Michelle walked out into the hall. Jesus Christ. She
Aw.
walked out into the hall to look at the cop, and she ran to his arms and she said, "You saved me." Ew, oh my god.
No, stop. It's so real.
I don't think I've ever cried on a Creep Time episode. Oh, Ew.
It's so tough.
That was so strange. Anyway, immediately after, Gina followed both of the women and she walked out of the home. All of them were taken to the hospital, as was Amanda. Sorry, give me one
Oh
second.
my god, no, I was gonna say, take your time, take your
I don't think I've
time. This was,
ever
like,
been affected
super
by a Creep
heavy.
Time episode. I wrote the research. Oh my god.
Yeah, but you know what? It shows,
Mm.
I'm just gonna say, like, just such empathy, I mean, for what these women had to go through. I think that's a job that's part of this. If you do this job well, I think it's that you're tapping into that and honoring them in that
Yeah, that
way.
was you're right. It was
Yeah.
just very unexpected. I didn't think that was gonna happen.
Well, your eyes look very blue.
Thanks. My Browns is gonna start running any
Yeah,
second.
you're a pretty crier.
Um, so the initial walkthrough of the home painted one of the clearest pictures of extreme and long-standing captivity that you can, of course, imagine. I mean, there was disbelief that these three girls had gone missing 10 years prior, and nobody thought they were going to see them again. Some of their family had died. But there is one thing that is still outstanding in this moment. Where is Ariel Castro? By the afternoon of that day, there was a manhunt that began looking for Ariel Castro, and surprisingly, it didn't take all too long to actually find him at a McDonald's, where they had arrested him, of course, immediately on charges of kidnapping and rape, and they had also, I thought this was interesting, they arrested his brothers just on suspicion that they could be
Mm,
involved in this conspiracy somehow. I will disclose they were later cleared, right? So they had nothing to do with this. It was just that they had to cast a wide net because they're like, we've never seen a case like this. We've never seen a story like this. Castro had also kept some records and letters, something that I wanted to include in this research, and I alluded to at the beginning of the story, something that we could say were journal entries. Many people believe that these might have actually been unused suicide notes. He talked about the situation with the girls and he talked about his actions, the things that he had done to them, and he had written that it was their fault. They were in this situation. He said that because they were gullible enough to have accepted a ride from a stranger, they deserved what they got. He also detailed very consistent contemplations about taking his own life, and he wrote about how he felt there might be two sides to him. He was both charged by this abduction and this captive scenario that he was the master of, he could dominate, but he was immensely aware of the atrocities that he was committing and wasn't sure how to deal with the guilt. He says in public he's a very normal person and that people see him as normal, but at night, in the privacy of these walls, he is someone else. I think that from what I've read about other psychologists who have talked about what he's kind of doing in these journal entries, suicide notes, whatever you would deem them, he is actually, whether he knows it or not, kind of trying to absolve himself of
mhm.
responsibility by saying that I have a problem. I'm sick. He calls himself a sick sexual predator in the notes. And what he's doing is he's making it seem to himself that this is something out of his control. He can't be held responsible for these bad doings because it's another side of him that he cannot control. But all that said, to button up to the end of this, of what would be a very horrific proceeding when it comes to the charges and courts, he was originally receiving something like, I believe, an indictment of 329 counts, including kidnapping, the rape, the exploitation, child endangerment. It was an endless list, which You would be shocked by this, and the prosecutors certainly were, but he is planning to plead not guilty. He wants to go in not guilty on that. As time lengthened and there were delays and extensions, the team eventually came back and they had actually upped the number of counts in that indictment. It was 977. 977 counts that they felt they could get him on, and they would seek the death penalty. They were clear about this. This time around, Ariel changed his tune and he decides to plead guilty once he knows the death penalty is involved.
Mhm.
Throughout the trial, his consistent deflection of blame would oscillate between talking about these early exposures to sex, pornography, an addiction to a sexually perverse life. And then at one point, he also blamed the FBI, where he was saying, well, it's probably their fault because they didn't catch me. And I was allowed to do this for so long. And then at another part, he's kind of asking for forgiveness from the girls and he asks them to remember the good times in the home and use the word at a certain point. There was a lot of harmony. He said harmony in the home.
Oh my God.
In one of the most chilling quotes that I had found from this trial, Michelle made a statement directly to him that reads as follows. You took 11 years of my life away. I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. I will overcome all that has happened, but you will face hell for eternity. I will live on. You will die a little every day as you think of the 11 years of atrocities that you inflicted on us. I can forgive you, but I will never forget. Castro was subsequently sentenced to consecutive life sentences in addition to 1,000 years without any possibility for parole, and his assets were seized. Judge Michael Russo finalized that sentencing by saying, "You will not be getting out. Is that clear?" To which Castro responded, "I do understand that, Your Honor." And I wish, Christ, do I wish that I could tell you and the creepers that I really think justice was served on this one. But
Mhm.
as we would learn, only a month after his sentencing and incarceration, Ariel Castro was found in his cell on September
Mhm.
3rd after he hung himself. And the exact determination of this as to whether it was a suicide or not, or an intentional suicide, I should say, was actually up for debate after they examined his body because the examiner believed that this might have been accidental as he had an autoerotic asphyxiation kink, and he might have been trying to do that on himself when he accidentally hung himself. But nonetheless, Castro is dead at the age of 53 after serving no more than 30 days in his cell for keeping these women in a cage for close to 11 years. To end our story, the women involved have gone back and forth between wanting to share their story and what happened to them with the public, but also deeply needing and requesting privacy to manage how to get through this trauma together and alone. And to respect that privacy, I will not go into too many details about where they are now. Michelle has been very public. She has written books, but the other two would like to stay a little more private. But
Mhm.
I do know, and I can tell you that they have continued to heal through therapy and also through advocacy work. They have been a part of countless acts of good when it comes to different organizations and systems that ensure that something like this hopefully will never happen again. But their story will live on as the three girls that were presumed to be dead, who held out until one lucky day when a door was left unlocked and a door was opened. And that is the story of their survival.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm gonna check on you. Are you doing okay?
I am. I'm okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did not anticipate that that would be really hard to get through at the end. I gotta
Yeah.
say, and just be very real with creepers and you,
Of
that that's
course.
never happened to me in a case. There are difficult cases to get through, but I don't know maybe why that affected me so much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a I think the way you presented it, like, because I felt it on the other end of this mic, like, I felt the heaviness. I felt like I was there. I felt like I was being held captive. So it's like when you get that release to know that these women survived, I had already started. I feel like we almost, like, had the same experience, but because you were the storyteller and I was the listener,
Mhm.
it was just it hit you at the end because you got the release. Like,
I think so.
Yeah, it's something I think it just speaks to, again, like, how well you tell me and the creepers these stories, like, and honoring these victims, and I know you wanna keep them private, so I won't say much, but I feel like all 3 of these women look like happy people. They have such goodness in their eyes, and I know it's just a couple
Mhm.
of photographs, but, like, they I feel like we can walk away knowing that we've just told a story of, like, 3 incredible human beings, like, to survive something like this,
Agreed.
uh,
Agreed.
and I hope that he is rotting somewhere because I hope that the home is gone. I see
It
something
was
about a
demolished.
demolition here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Good,
It was,
good.
I actually think it was demolished before he was even sentenced, before his sentencing was even finalized, so he knew his home was gone, but and not to say I don't know if that had any effect on, what he ended up doing in his cell,
Mhm.
but I do think there is something to how they've been able to heal because all 3 of them made it out, and the little
Yeah,
girl as well.
mhm.
You
But
know,
well yeah,
they will never be the same, but they can find healing, I think, in knowing that all 3 of them survived that, and that's an
mhm.
experience that the 3 of them will remember. They fought their way out of after nearly 11 years.
I was trying to think back to other stories we have talked about of, like, captivity. I mean, some of the ones that popped in my mind were, like, the Chowchilla case, and then there was the
Mhm.
case of the children that were being held, like, by their own parents, and I know that that was years and years
Yeah.
and years. Um, but yeah, I mean, I when you started telling the story, I had no idea, first of all, that they would survive, but second
I
of
tried
all
to keep that kind of hidden towards the end because I really wanted the weight of that to also
yeah,
hit that, like, no, they made their way out of this.
yeah. I just it kind of hit me at the end with Amanda's call, like,
Mm,
10 frickin' years, like, and lifetimes, by the way, lived in that home. Lifetimes of because we all go through things in life and we remember our chapters and our hard times and our good times. I mean, these women were having to make good out of chapter upon chapter upon chapter of hell. And like that is I don't know if there is, you know, something out there that gives back universally to people that somehow make good out of that much evil, but I hope that
mhm,
these 3 women get all of that times a million because I
mm.
just you and I will never know what that is like, and most people, it's really remarkable that they are functioning,
No,
let
I hope that
alone
too. They're
good.
amazingly well spoken for the interviews they've given as well. They have been so generous to give the details about their experience in hopes to raise awareness for the organizations and systems they work with because their sole effort and goal about publicizing any of this has been about how do we prevent this from ever happening again?
Mhm, mhm.
Because there were some things, and I won't get too deep into this, but of course we know that Michelle's case wasn't even really handled as like a missing person case. By the time Abby and Gina were gone, they were loosely connected in the media. They were like, oh, they were taken from the same street. Maybe it could be the same guy. There was something that went on with Gina's case where they refused to send out an Amber Alert for some reason, even though she technically would fit the bill, I think, as like an endangered child. But
Mm,
her father has been very vocal of that from what I've read, where he thought that that was a fatal flaw early on in the case, that because there seemed to be no witnesses who saw this, maybe if an Amber Alert had gone out for her,
yeah.
they could have stopped this in year 2 of the abductions instead of year 11.
I just can't I just recalled that she knew him. I mean, that in and of itself is one of the most sinister aspects of this whole thing.
I didn't get into this because again, it's really challenging to like pack all of this into like one singular hour episode.
Yeah,
So of course there are so many details you have to sacrifice and you're like, what is the most critical? But he had people over at that house during those 10 years, by the way. He had company. He had his kids over at the house, and they talked about this experience where he would constantly be playing music really, really loud to
cover it.
muffle any of the screaming that might be coming, but also would, warn them if somebody was coming over, and he would threaten them to say, like, "If you pull anything, you know what's gonna happen to you," Or then once he had the leverage of the child, he was like, "You know what's gonna happen to her."
Mm.
So it was just a toxic game of the mind games, the psychological torture, and also playing with fire in a way of having people over the house while they have no idea that in the bedroom above them, there are 3 girls that have chains around their necks.
I don't know if you can share or if anything has really been shared, but do we know how the little girl is?
I think she's been kept pretty private from all of
Yeah,
this, mostly
I would
because
imagine.
Amanda has wanted to keep private, but she is with Amanda.
Yeah,
Again, they
good.
were all reunited in the hospital because once they were sent to the hospital, they surprisingly didn't have many major injuries except for Michelle. I believe she was kept for something like 4 days because she had suffered quite a bit and had
Yeah.
been there the longest.
Well, I'm glad that freaking house is gone because that's what I was thinking in my head. I was like, those women deserve everything, but they deserve for that house to be like not around anymore because
Yeah.
that is, I can't imagine anybody ever wanting to inhabit it. After
Baby,
darks, baby.
After Dark is
After dark upon after dark upon
so
after dark.
wildly needed right now. It's insane. Thank you for bearing with
Of
me towards
course.
the middle of that. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
I think it was any of the parts where I started to I'm telling a story because when I'm telling it too, I don't know if you experience this. As I'm reading it or recalling it, I tend to see myself sometimes in the first person. So when I'm speaking in Michelle's voice, sometimes I'm thinking about like her seeing him. I can't talk about because I'm going to start crying again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what I mean? And I think that's what
Yeah.
was happening where I envisioned when that officer first saw her in the hallway and she saw him and they had that moment of realization where if she came face to face with a cop, she knew in that moment immediately, my life is never going to be the same.
Yeah.
This is over. Even if Castro's in this house because I was just seen by an officer, this is over.
Yeah. It's like imagining that kind of relief is it's a relief on a level that I don't know. I mean, I just can't even imagine.
Okay, let's wrap this one before
Relief.
I was like, speaking of,
I
honey.
know. I'm like, I will not make you
Ooh.
talk anymore. Oh my
Well,
God.
creepers, we want to thank you so much for listening to this story.
Yes.
I feel proud that I was able to get through this episode, but if anything, I just feel grateful that this was a story that came across my desk and that I was able to buckle down to really, tell it and share it with you guys for some people who may not even know the story of Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to you, Stu, for listening.
Thank you for that. I mean, that was a story that I think really needed to be told. I feel like better off in my life, and again, walking away like I do a lot of times, but feeling so grateful for my life.
Mm.
So yeah,
Well, thank you to all of you. We hope that you take good care of yourselves after this episode. And as
maybe go
always,
have a drink.
have a drink
Maybe have a
and
cocktail.
send it to the universe and say goodbye.
And good luck, y'all.
Bye, creepers.
Bye, creepers.